Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for being patient with technology and with us while we're trying to get some more panelists on with their tech issues. My name is Sheetal Chawla and I lead strategy for life sciences at Capgemini, and I'm the executive sponsor and host for this fireside series. Today's event is part of a trilogy series focused on levers that are and will continue to drive seismic change in healthcare. So the three topics this series will cover are the changing balance of patient power, the accelerated importance of technology, and finally, the last session will cover the call to action for pharma and biotech companies and medtech companies and what they should be doing differently. I'm very much looking forward to today's topic and the heart of life sciences and pharma, which is the patient. This topic today seems even more relevant as we sit here in a COVID-19 environment. Every one of us is thinking about health, even more so, even if it's not part of our day job. We are all and have been patients. We're all consumers of healthcare. So what does that mean practically? We know that healthcare consumers and patients have been empowered. We're making decisions today that were opaque to us before. We'll talk a bit about multiple sclerosis specifically, but I know from personal sort of experience that in multiple sclerosis, the standard is that a physician will speak to a patient about treatment options and let them decide what their treatment should be and what they should be moving forward with. A two-way dialogue is not just encouraged, but it's expected today. And in response, many life sciences companies aim to be patient-centric. You will not find a single healthcare company in the space that does not acknowledge the importance of patients through visuals, through their homepage, through apps, through patient support programs. The list goes on in how patient centricity is manifested. But what does patient centricity really mean? How will the role of the patient continue to evolve in the future? And how will we stay lockstep with not just patients' needs today, but how they evolve tomorrow and in the future? These are all topics I look forward to exploring with my panelists today and with all of you on the telecon. We have a Q&A function on your screen, so please engage with us throughout this discussion. Send us your questions. We will have time to address both your comments and questions at the end. So let me start by introducing our panelists. And as I mentioned, a couple of them are still logging on because of some tech issues. So first and foremost, we have Dan and Jennifer Digman. They're a couple. They're both multiple sclerosis patients, and they're also each other's caregivers. We could not have a patient centricity panel and fireside chat today without patients. We also have Irfan Khan, who is the CEO of Circuit Clinical. We have Alicia Stanley, the leader of patient advocacy and patient engagement from Medidata. Angela Radcliffe, the head of data governance and stewardship from Bristol Myers Squibb. Fran Grote, the practice lead of digital drug development from ISG. And finally, Olivier Zatoun, who is the Capgemini Invent Life Sciences leader. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to see all of you.
Great to be
Dan and Jennifer, I want to start with you first. As we said, this is about patients, so we want to start with getting your guys' point of view first. Tell us about your journey in multiple sclerosis and how that has evolved since you were first diagnosed.
I actually was diagnosed with MS on Valentine's Day of 2000, and so it's been a journey long in the making, two decades, and I think that's you know, it was scary when I was diagnosed, and you just kind of building and finding the information, digging into that, saying what is multiple sclerosis, and am I going to die from it? You don't know. And so a lot of that, the unknowns and the questions, because back then there wasn't the internet as we know it today, and you couldn't just like Google it. And so it's been a long time coming.
And I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 8 days after my 23rd birthday. And this November 14th, which is my diagnosis day, it'll be 23 years since I was diagnosed. So I was 23 years old. I had just graduated from college. The internet was certainly not what it is now. So I was diagnosed and I had to go, look at things like books and talk with other, professional support groups. My doctor gave me there were 3 disease modifying therapies available at the time. And he handed me pamphlets for all 3 and he said, you pick. And I went, okay, this is an injectable. I only have to take once a week. Let's start there. So, certainly he was a friendly doctor, but he left so much up to me and I had so little knowledge. So in the beginning, it was difficult, like Dan said. And fortunately, Dan and I met at a MS program back in 2002. And so that has been amazing because we've had each other as a support for, obviously for each other. So I think that really helped. And that's made this journey, this life with multiple sclerosis, certainly much more bearable.
And I think that's where you end up then doing that transition then from being an MS patient to an MS caregiver. The both of us for each other. And so you see a lot of other things. And obviously we have the perspective of an MS patient, so I can understand and relate to some of her issues. But at the same time, there's a lot more that goes into the caregiving aspect of it. And so it's best of both worlds, the worst of worst worlds. And so.
Well, you two are some of the most positive people, and you provide me so much perspective when I talk to you. And it's just a phenomenal story. I talked a bit about patient experience, and Irfan, I know this is a topic close to your heart. But Dan and Jennifer, I wanted to get your perspective first on when we or the industry talks about patient experience. What does that mean to you? And is that something that you rate? Is that something that is top of mind for you? Tell us about experience.
I think as a person, I'm not walking anymore. My multiple sclerosis, I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS. But within 5 years after my diagnosis, my disease progressed and I began using a wheelchair. So for me, looking at any sort of material that is about just relapsing remitting, it sometimes can be a little difficult. And I know just in the last few years, medication was released for secondary progressive and more progressive forms of the disease. But I think looking at other patients who have similar experience really means a lot to me. Or seeing people who are going through something I can relate to.
Yeah, I think that just, as far as the patient experience with the medications, with everything, it's just a matter of you don't really know or recognize what it is you're dealing with or what you need to deal with until you're in the thick of it, what you need to know. And so my experience in terms of finding the information, I think that's where it's really gotten better with the internet, but also I think more overwhelming. Whereas when we were first diagnosed, we had 3 disease modifying drugs. And I think I'd use the analogy of growing up, we had 3 channels of TV and you could choose one of 3 channels. Easier, just pick your channel. Whereas it's now there's almost 20 disease modifying therapies for multiple sclerosis. And I liken that now to where we have cable and dish network, everything, and you've got 150 billion channels. So what do you find to watch? So then it's with the drugs, which is the most effective for me. And so, I mean, on some levels, the patient experience has gotten better because there are more medicines to take, but it's gotten a lot more complicated because it's not 3 and out. It's like you've got so many to choose from.
Right. Thank you. Irfan, I know you talk about experience so much, and Alicia, I would love your point of view on this also. Can you tell us about patient engagement and experience, starting with the clinical side of things?
Sure, I'll start and throw it over to Alicia. I think that I think listening to Dan and Jennifer, that is a really great example of the importance of decision support. There's as much anxiety and decision paralysis caused by a lot of options. It isn't like any of us have a clear, crystal ball telling us how things are going to work out. So you really do need context, and context is other people like you, right? That's true everywhere else. We shop online. That's what we're looking for. And context is being able to engage those people to sort of hear what they have to say. So I think those elements have been missing in clinical trials, for example, as people try to navigate that space. I think there's an opportunity for improvement. And then I think when I think of engagement, I think of it as something that's reciprocal. It's two-way, and that's another part of this equation that's been missing on the drug development clinical trial side, which is that it's not a push, it's not an email going out. Those have terrible open rates, and they don't really result in an attachment. And I equally don't think it's a survey that just comes up over the wall. Sponsors with great intentions will ask questions, but the information goes up over a wall, and a patient never really sees what was made of that or what does it mean or any of the rest of those things. So and again, we'll use the word patient, but I loved how you put it, Chital, that everyone should have it in their heads. If you're not one yet, stay tuned, right? Like none of us get out of this thing alive. So the idea is that we should approach it with that empathy and that humility, that we're all patients. We should be optimizing the experience for everyone who is a patient right now, if for no other reason other than enlightened self-interest. What I'll say is that I see it as a two-way. I think it's important for people to have their opinion sought, and then to be able to recognize that their opinion is in a public space for others like them to benefit. That starts to open the door to greater conversations. And Alicia, I'll throw this over to you. Your take on that.
Sure. So can you hear me, first of all?
Yes.
All right,
Yes,
good. Good, because I was one of the ones that was having some technical challenges getting logged in here today. So first of all, thanks for having me. And this question in particular, I think is so important. And just to build on what Irfan was just saying, I think the thing that's most important for me when we're talking about patient experience in clinical research is about information exchange. So to me, information is sort of the great equalizer in this space. And without it, there will always be a power imbalance, and there will always be an element of mistrust that's sort of placed into the relationships that are so critical for advancing a clinical trial or a clinical research opportunity. So I think I am a 3-time cancer survivor. I was diagnosed when I was 19 years old. I just crossed over my 30th year of survivorship. I've had my challenges with clinical trials and with healthcare, but for me right now, at this point in my career and in my cancer journey, it's about information and making sure that the information exchange is equitable. So meaning it comes from the clinical research team, but information that's also presented by patients or participants comes back with an equal importance, if not more. Because I think we've gotten to a point where we have just a structural imbalance, the way that information is sort of shared around that aspect of relationship in the clinical trial. So.
Thank you for sharing your point of view, and also thank you for sharing your personal journey with us, Alicia. I think it adds a lot of context to what you bring to the table. You mentioned information. Sometimes that can translate to data. Angela, I'm looking at you as the head of data and governance. So tell us about the role of data and advancing patient centricity in your role at BMS.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I think a lot of you know I spent the last 20 plus years in patient engagement, and I moved into the data space over here at BMS because to me, data really is the lifeblood of how our organizations will serve patients in the future. And data is what it takes for us to develop new drugs. It's what it takes for us to appropriately provide decision support to patients who are trying to figure out which of these 10 or 20 therapies are available to them. It's really essential in the way that we do everything from how we handle our supply chain to, you know, how we talk to our employees, right? So data in and of itself is critical, but it's in our ability to democratize data in a way that respects patients' needs. That's where the real power is. Many of our organizations, ours included, are on a journey to try and figure out how do we put the appropriate principles and guardrails in place to start to usher in new eras of things like intentional consent. So how do we start to ask patients to share with us the types of data that will help us establish completely new treatments or therapies in different ways, not just sacrificing their bodies and their willingness to be investigated as part of a clinical trial, or as as consumers of our medications, but sharing their data in such a way that we might be able to find completely new and unexplored pathways. But data, has value that begins and ends with how well it's trusted and with how well we reciprocate back to the owners of that data something of value. And so when it comes to patient engagement, if we want to improve and we want to do better for patients, it means establishing a trusted relationship with patients on their terms to leverage their data to do new and better and exciting things.
Thank you, Angela. Fran, you have a really interesting perspective on data and information. And when you and I have spoken, you often say, life sciences is now becoming data sciences. Would love to get your perspective on partnerships you're seeing in your role at ISG and collaborations that are taking place in this space to advance patient centricity.
Sure. Thank you, Chantal. And I think one comment that I want to make, just because it is a theme that's been implied in all of the comments that we've heard so far, and I just want to make it really upfront, is that everyone has taken a different aspect of talking about patient empowerment. And really, patient centricity is about empowering the patients, about empowering them with data and information, choices, support. And I think no matter how we approach patient centricity, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's not just about making decisions, but it's also about giving people whatever tools they need to make those decisions. And data, of course, is a huge piece of that. So there are a number of significant collaborations that are going on between academic institutions and biopharma companies, between heritage technology providers who traditionally worked more in the IT space and are now beginning to understand that the principles of handling information have to be about what that information is going to be used for. And in the life sciences space, those collaborations it's actually a cycle, and it's flowing back into the drug development process, where a lot of those companies that used to call themselves either clinical research organizations that provided support or ethical manufacturers who did the actual work to discover and market the drugs are seeing themselves more as data scientist companies. So companies who use information with a specific goal in mind and leverage that information to provide something that, frankly, they bring to the marketplace. And I think for me, the connection that really still needs to be made a lot more strongly is that what gets brought to the marketplace has to be brought there at the behest of the patients. So I know companies are listening to the patients, but I think that the patients need to be engaged much more deeply in the early aspects of the process and the cycle, so that they're influencing what gets brought to the market instead of just receiving it.
It's a great point, and really important distinction and point that you brought up about patient empowerment. Thank you, Fran.
Sure.
Olivier, over to you. Fran just talked about listening to patients, and I have the unique advantage of knowing the work that our Capgemini team has done in life sciences, specifically with regard to patient engagement, and taking those data points from listening to those patients and creating tools and assets for them to use. Can you tell us about trends you're seeing and maybe some of the work we have done as a team to address patient empowerment by really listening to our patients?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, a major trend is finally the acknowledgement that patient centricity today within the pharma space is definitely no longer if or when, but a must and a must now. So we're starting to see this buzzword, which was patient centricity a few years ago, becoming truly now finally a reality. And it's obviously done through organization change and culture change, but also very much with technology, right? And data, of course. In terms of technology, what we see very much now is really the rise of digital health solution or digital medicine, digital companion app that could be connected to a smart injector that will help the patient track their injection every day, helping the patient understand how what's happening with their treatment, and also be able to predict what you should do next time. So this type of new solution is really arising now, not only on the commercial side to support the patient once they start treatment, but also on the clinical side as well, leveraging wearables and sensor to really help and facilitate this influx of new data. So that's definitely a trend that's very much rising. But it's also augmented within the organization, within the pharmaceutical organization, in terms of how they look at patient centricity and what they should do to better understand the patient. It starts with data, as we've been talking about data a lot. We're starting to see pharma companies partnering with data startups that are consolidating data from multiple sets, from genomic data plus wearable and wearable data, as well as obviously EHR and claims data, to better have a full view, I would say longitudinal view of the patient, to better really understand what truly are the patient outcomes. Actually, I was hearing this morning that one of our clients is considering switching the payment of their reps, not paying the commission of the reps, not based on the prescription that the physician are actually prescribing, but on patient outcomes. Again, reinforcing the importance of patient outcomes, in the way they're commercializing the product.
Thank you, Olivier. That's really insightful. So I want to stay grounded on Dan and Jennifer, your point of view. And I want to ask you a question about when you're engaging with different aspects of your community. So when we spoke ahead of this panel, I asked you, do you go to pharma company websites? Do you go to the MS Society's website? Do you attend support groups and patient groups? So where do you look to for information, and what are those trusted sources of information? And what are maybe areas of improvement, if you have seen any?
I think certainly probably everything that you said is something that we check. First and foremost, we check with our community, people that are living with multiple sclerosis. I know that carries the most weight for both Dan and I. Doctors are fantastic, but if they're not living with the disease and they don't know what a drug is like to really have to put in your body, then it's nice to talk to someone in the community. We look at resources like the National MS Society or the MS Foundation, but we also, Dan was curious about a drug that he's thinking about taking, so he has looked at their website and spoken with some people that we know through other social sites about their experiences with the drug.
I think that, first and foremost, it is other patients really speaks volumes. And I think then living with the disease for 2+ decades, you start to know who you can trust as your MS influencers. I mean, it's almost like you need something to, like your introduction, like your porch to the MS world. Well, I want to talk to somebody who's been there, done that, who's had the experience. And then you start digging deeper. And it's only at that point do I really start digging into the ins and outs of something like a pharmaceutical website or a drug company website, because I want to know more about it. But it's like there's the sense that if I go to a company, they're going to tell me exactly what they want me to hear. I want to hear what other people are experiencing. And so we do that. But then you go to the credible sources like the MS Society website, their MS Foundation, just like what are they saying? Because they obviously have a vested interest in it as well. I think you talk about challenges or you talked, I believe it was like other things or developments or things that have gone further. I think just to where the pharmaceutical companies are doing, I see where they're reaching out and connecting with the influencers and getting their take on things or having them put their perspectives out there in a good way. I mean, obviously the person that, or if you have an influencer that we trust and they talk about a product or a drug or something, it carries more weight, and I will at least stop and think of it more because this influencer that I highly respect thought enough of it. Because obviously there is so much information out there, we can't gather it all in. And so I think that's where I see more with what pharmaceutical companies have been doing, and I think it's great because it it makes the companies more approachable to me as a patient. That it's like, okay, they're not just this high mighty thing that just kind of sits back like the great Oz. It's like, no, you want people down at your level. And I forget who had said it earlier, just to where it's like, it's not, we shouldn't have to go to the companies. They should be coming to us and hitting us and reaching us where we're at as patients. And I think one other thing that they can do more of now is like the sense that, when somebody gets diagnosed with MS, that's not the only person in their family that's dealing with it. So, I mean, I think that they could do more by reaching out to the caregivers, to the families, to make it seem more, to feel like they get you, they get me as a patient, or it gets me as a caregiver. It's like, I need resource. And I think that's one of the big things where they can go further.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I know one of the touch points that a lot of companies have with patients is recruiting for clinical trials before a drug is on the market. Maybe Alicia, Irfan, and maybe Angela, you have thoughts on this as well, on what those touch points mean today and how could they be ameliorated from a patient engagement standpoint while recruiting?
Yeah, I think it's very, very difficult right now for a patient who might qualify for a clinical trial opportunity to find their way to that opportunity. Dan and Jennifer summed it up perfectly. We're not providing patients with the peer support they get in every other healthcare environment when it comes to evaluating an option like a clinical trial. Through no ill intent, clinicaltrials.gov, almost by design, does not serve patients in that way. It's really meant to be more of a clearinghouse, but it's a branching off point for and it's a pretty good example of where the opportunity is, I think, in terms of addressing those first milestones. The minute you touch a keyboard, for yourself or your loved ones, trying to take that next step and say, hey, what are those options? That's step one. And then thinking about, okay, now I've figured out some options near me. What do I think about that? What do people like me think about that? All of that stuff is all very murky and has been murky almost by design for decades. And so when we talk about the movement or the concept of patient centricity, there's a lot layered in there. I mean, you look at sort of what could happen. These days, everybody's all about decentralized trials and making it more convenient for patients. I think there's things to do that are very practical that you're hearing Dan and Jennifer and even and Alicia describe too from her personal experience, which is that there's that information asymmetry is about respect, right? And if you're not providing that respect up front, it's quite the journey to ask somebody to trust you with your development program. So I think the way I look at this optimistically is there is opportunity to do better. And I think it starts recognizing what that decision journey looks like, and how to optimize for those spaces that are very addressable using kind of, modern technologies that have been around for 20 years. So, Alicia?
Yeah, I think you raised a really good point about trust, after the fact, when there's that information asymmetry that you've discussed, and trying to play catch up and rebuild trust after you've not captured that out of the gate becomes extraordinarily difficult to, keep the process moving, if you will. And I think in recruitment or looking for potential clinical trial opportunities, the industry speaks of it as a recruitment opportunity, but for the patient seeking out a clinical trial, it could be about finding a better therapy to make their life more manageable. And I think there's a fundamental disconnect between how the industry talks about finding patients for clinical trials and how patients talk about participating in clinical trials. They're actually at odds with each other. There's the business perspective of clinical research, and then there's the patient perspective, which sometimes is very focused on whether or not a person's going to get better or is going to live longer. And sometimes the disconnect or the discord that comes about with that kind of contention really makes it a difficult space to work in at times.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, Alicia, these are all such important points. And, of all the things I've learned from you over the years, one of them is we need to build this in by design, right? We can't just, the asymmetry or the dissonance comes from the fact that we try and retrofit what we're doing to what we think a patient needs instead of including them and their thoughts by design. Look at the fact that we are just starting to put real patients in drug ads. That alone always surprises me, right? Thanks to the joy of the way that our advertising works on, our Hulus and Netflixes of the world now. I had an RA ad. I don't have RA, but I had an RA ad targeted at me and repeated 600 times. And I can tell you, I know Aaron and Margot very, very well from that ad. And, it was sort of fascinating to me because the whole time it just became more real, like how unreal they were, right? And so if that's what we're doing on the advertising our drugs side, we have a longer path to go. We need to continue to just grapple with topics like returning data to patients after they're in a clinical trial. There's still many times, and I am not alone on this panel as being someone who's participated and continues to participate in trials. And I can tell you, I'm not getting any data back from my trials just yet, right? And there are things that we could be even thinking about that are coming sort of on the forefront of how we're using things like data to sort of stick to my lane today a little bit. What about digital twins? What if, Dan and Jennifer had the opportunity to, before they made a decision about a drug or a clinical trial, they could see how that played out on data models around people like themselves instead of being those people. So we have a lot of interesting areas to explore, but it starts with being pragmatic and practical about it instead of sort of this pie in the sky buzzword that Olivier mentioned earlier, this patient-centricity. We could go so much further than we are now.
I just want to add to what you were saying, Angela. I think one of the things that we struggle with in this industry is that we still look at this too transactionally. Like we feel like if we just have the perfect ad, we can recruit all the patients and then everything's going to be fine. But I still feel like the area for innovation in life sciences is to come up with a better business model, or throw out the existing business model and let's start over, and have companies step up and say, you know what, yeah, this is how we functioned up until this point, but in order to truly make this better, not only for the industry from a business perspective, but truly putting the patient goals and objectives before the business objectives, you know, where's the company that can step up and actually really upend the industry and make us look at this differently?
Yeah,
Lisa, if I may, that's really interesting that you're saying that, because I've had some conversations just over the past week to 10 days where, as a result of COVID and the disruption that has caused in the clinical trial process, companies have suddenly begun to wake up to the fact, based on patients demanding for them to find ways to make the clinical trials more accessible in a virtual world. So I think, you know, despite themselves, they're being forced to look at that opportunity now.
Be honest, we hope that there's never another opportunity like this in the near future for a true business reset. That you know, I keep saying, if there's anything that good comes out of COVID, it's a total fundamental rework of business frameworks and, you know, and looking at the industry in a totally different way. And I really like the intellectual superpowers that are on this call here. I feel like we could do it if we had the collaboration and the consensus that this is our moment in time to truly change it.
Yeah.
Alicia, you started sort of answering my next question, which was going to be around, if you were speaking to a CEO of a pharmaceutical company, what advice might you have for him or her or that board of directors to make patient centricity and patient empowerment, Fran, to use your word, really the center of their business? So we talked about, you know, changing the business model. Like, are there things in the business model that you're seeing that might be a way to fix it? Do you have thoughts on that? We talked about changing the nature of the business, from moving from being transactional. We've talked about, Dan and Jennifer, you mentioned, you know, getting the unvarnished truth so that it's not coming from a biased source. So what might be some of those words of advice that you all have for said CEO?
I'll take a stab at it. I would tell her that if this disruption taught us anything, it's that what we traditionally thought of as risky turns out to be a way to de-risk the enterprise. For example, we used to think, well, in drug development, for example, using research sites that have prior experiences has been sort of the rule of law forever. And what we learned was that if you only use those specific areas and people stop coming to those kinds of visits, they'll still go to their regular doctors. And so that idea of using a new to research spot as used to be thought of as risky, and now it's seen as actually an opportunity to make drug discovery and development of medicine safer. I think there's those kinds of opportunities to take away from it. It is a conservative industry. It took us, I don't know, maybe 20 years to move beyond calling our participants subjects, right? And so maybe this is a window where we can move beyond that and say, you know, enough with the talk. It's time for action. It's time to innovate and really be sort of open to innovation, because companies that are open to innovation have a better chance to run their programs the next time there is a disruption of some kind.
And I would just add to that something I feel very passionate about is that the patient is not just the consumer. The patient should be the driver of the process. And there are certain companies who are kind of dipping their toe in the water of getting patients engaged a lot earlier to help in the planning process, having patient panels review protocols before they cement them into place. I think there needs to be a lot more of that in the industry.
Well, I mean, also, don't you think this is the only space where the supply and demand is flipped to the way it should be? You know, any other consumer product that we buy as patients and consumers, we dictate what the market does for us. And, you know, And I'm proud to say that we need to adopt that mindset and thinking in pharma and beyond, in the entire healthcare industry, because until we recognize that that patients are not a commodity and that we're all patients, we're not going to get anywhere on this one.
Yeah. Especially when we look at new type of therapies like gene therapy or cell therapies, right? When the patient is truly at the center of the treatment, the patient is a treatment. The patient is the center of the supply chain. So it changed completely the relationship between the pharmaceutical company and the patient, right? But building on what's been said earlier about how to better understand the patient and what we would say to a CEO is really about evolving the thinking about a patient, right? Looking at the patient differently, which means having more data sets, as we discussed earlier, but also thinking differently of how we are learning from the patient, how we listen to the patient, not only, obviously running surveys, which we discussed earlier, not only hearing with the patient what the patient is saying, but also what the patient is doing. So evolving the way we're doing research, for example. And we saw the result of what's happening with just the difference between people say and people do with the polls and election, a few weeks ago. But it's actually the reality for every day. So evolving the way we are understanding the patient, utilizing new type of research like ethnography research or new technology tools to be able to learn differently about how patients are acting and doing will help us having a better view of the patient and therefore be more patient-centric.
Absolutely.
Any other comments on advice for our CEO?
Well, I think since I've had multiple sclerosis and I've met so many people in my community, I've never heard a person say, gosh, I want to have this disease forever. So I think if the companies realize we want this gone and we will do whatever we can, we're not sitting back just waiting for the drug companies to cure us. We want to be active in that. I want to have a part in curing Dan's disease and I think that we're valuable and we need to, as patients, realize that. But pharmaceutical companies, if we can meet and realize that we can be working together, I think that would be powerful.
And I think the one thing as far as advice, it's like, don't forget about, there seems to be a big push for, like in the MS world, the newly diagnosed or somebody who's just diagnosed with something. It's like the pharmaceutical companies could do so much in reaching out to, or, finding things, ways to connect with, sometimes we feel like we've been put out to pasture because we've had it for, 20 plus years. And so it's just like, how do you connect? How do you keep people engaged in that? And I think there's just a lot of other opportunities because, like I say, there's a lot of research and development for the next best thing. Well, how many people are coming in that are diagnosed with the disease? You're missing out on the captive audience. You're not, of people who are living with, and it doesn't have to be MS. It can be anything really. And it's just like that you continue to stay and keep them engaged and find ways to find out what they're looking for, what they need. Especially, I always say, like, I do a lot for college recruitment, and it's just like, it's like, oh, well, we bring the students here, but then, okay, just you can do your own thing now because we're recruiting the next class. And so you wonder why students leave the colleges, because you're doing nothing to retain them. And so I think just there you've got to build in market. Once you have the patient engaged, then and that's how, that could be great for recruiting, future, clinical trial participants, whether or not they would be able to participate. They know people who could drive them in. So, I mean, you've got built-in resources right there.
But, and Dan and Jennifer, just to build on what you were saying, I think we've got a case study unfolding in front of us right now to address exactly what you just said. You're 20 plus years into this, you're a long-term participant in the MS community, if you will. And in COVID-19, you're starting to see more and more about the COVID-19, the long haulers, the people that have gotten over the initial infection or initial diagnosis, I guess, if you will, and 4, 6, 8 months later, they're still dealing with side effects. But the focus and the media attention on the quote unquote long haulers is essentially building an excellent case study for both of you, dealing with it for 20 years, me as a 30-year cancer survivor. People are starting to come back to me and go, wow, I see that the COVID people are dealing with stuff. What do you deal with your cancer survivorship? And I'm like, how long do you have? I could, I could tell you a lot about what it's like. And I think there's a collective awareness that's going to happen over the next few months as we hear more and more about the COVID long haul population, that if the industry is paying attention to, there's going to be some classic case studies that are going to have to come out of that can be brought back to all of our patient communities.
Absolutely.
At least that makes the argument for the value of kind of engaging those very patients right from the start, to understand that in addition to you going on this journey in terms of treatments, vaccines, whatever that is, understanding what your experience is like is really valuable. And we'd like to understand that now. We'd like to understand it at a month. We'd like to understand it 6 months in a year, because I think it's going to be high on the list of what patients who are considering any of these treatments or these vaccines are going to want to know, which is, yeah, but what was it like? That's the real question, right? It's what I would want to know. And I'm sure it's what my family would want to know if they were considering a treatment. Like, what is it actually like? And, I get to say this because I'm in the club, right? Like, as much as patients like to talk to doctors, right? Like, again, if we're not taking that medicine, our information set, as Jennifer noted, is limited. And it's limited in a way that makes it less relevant than what somebody who's already having that experience has to say about it. So I think that I like the line, the observation that my partner, Kerry Hicks, who's the founder of HealthGrades, noted. He said that very few of us can speak knowledgeably about our healthcare itself. Alicia, Dan, and Jennifer are by far the rare exceptions that prove the rule. Very few of us can. But every single one of us can speak very authentically and very knowledgeably about our healthcare experiences. And that's the opportunity, I think.
Well, and isn't it time to meet patients where they are and cherish what they bring to the table and let them offer what they have to share and then return value back for that? I think that's a place that we could start. That would be so simple, is just meeting people where they are. You're a cancer survivor. You've had MS for 20 years. You've been in a trial. You haven't. You don't have health literacy. You do. You're willing to share your body, and you're not, but you're willing to share your data. I think it's time we have to create that partnership that Dan and Jennifer talked about with patients. It's a relationship, and a relationship means effort on both parts. It's a two-way relationship, and we're in an ecosystem together. This isn't a one-way transactional exchange.
And when you're not as attractive as you once were, if you will give me room to say that, when I was walking, when I was first diagnosed, I was like, oh, look at her go. She's rocking multiple sclerosis. And then 5 years into it, I have to start using a wheelchair. And it's like, ew, she's not going to do well on her drug, or I don't want to take what she's taking. And it's like, I still have a fantastic quality of life. I still have so much to offer. I'm still able to bury a cute man. There are good things. So that's why it's so important that you see the community, and we need to be out there and we need to be engaged. Thanks. I had to get my 2 cents in.
Yeah, a very good point. Very good point. There's a lot of questions. I'm looking at the Q&A. There's phenomenal comments for all of you, and a lot of head nodding and kudos. There's some heat around the question around COVID and whether it is acting as an accelerator Angela, you mentioned, going to where patients are, although you did not mean it in a physical way, but through telemedicine, right? Doctors can be in the homes of patients more than they ever have been before. So tell us your thoughts on the impact of COVID on this topic specifically.
So I had an experience just this week myself where I realized that we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that everything aligns well to meet patients where they are, more literally than what I said. I called to get a prescription based on a lab result through telemedicine. And telemedicine said, I can't give you that prescription because nobody's prescribed it for you within the last 30 days. I'm like, yeah, but my labs say I need it. That's not how telemedicine works in this state. So, so we have this great opportunity to take technologies like telemedicine and unleash them in a better way. But we have to realize that there's a significant cultural lift that comes with this on so many levels. It's a regulatory culture shift in our country and others. It's a shift of upskilling and reskilling our clinicians who are used to, many of them, they got into the work because they wanted to in-person physically care for and connect with their patients and not have that glass between them, right? So that there's empathy building that has to happen. There's a lot of cultural change that has to happen here, and for us as patients to be willing to adopt, to try new things, et cetera. So COVID, I think, has opened this amazing door for us to leverage, especially around giving us a nice, gentle push in industry and beyond around taking the leap to stuff that we should have been doing a long time ago. But if we want this to stick and we want it to last, we've got to look at the cultural change, and we have to think about what we need to do to make it successful, because any great change still comes with unintended consequences if we're not looking for them.
That's a good point.
Absolutely. Olivier, Fran, Alicia, comments?
I mean, at our end, from a kind of Capgemini standpoint, we see COVID-19 as being an amazing accelerator, actually, a catalyst of innovation. A lot of the transformation, initiative that were slowly being implemented over the last few years finally are being accelerated dramatically. We're looking at turnaround within few weeks versus few months or few years now on very important business transformation across the value chain, clinical and commercial. We talk about being data-driven, which is definitely a major transformation pretty much across the industry. We talk about digital health and software as medical device and digital medicine rising on the commercial side and clinical side. But also we look at how some of the pharma industry is also itself making more alliances with other key players in healthcare space. We talk about those alliances between academia and pharma, but also we see pharmaceutical companies partnering with providers and payers to really provide a full 360 support of that patient. Even the concept of patient services is evolving from market access to really supporting the well-being of the patient. So we see those conversations happening now, and it's new, it's fresh, and it's definitely timely.
So I agree with Olivier, and I also see the excitement in it, but I think it just puts a spotlight on what we've been talking about, which is it's all too easy to get excited by the opportunities and forget about the patient. And so here again, it's really critical to bring it full circle and say, who are we really doing this for?
That's great.
Examples where doing the right thing is actually also the almost the game theory optimal way to develop a medicine. Taking really great care of the patient information asymmetries, providing that kind of front end respect, providing decision support, and all of the rest of that only increases the likelihood people would actually choose to go on that particular journey and stay engaged to its completion, which is good for everybody. Yes, it's good for the bottom line of a drug development program, but that by definition is good for everyone too, in helping something new get to market that can be good for patients. So it is one of these nice intersections, I think, in our space that a better argument for patient centricity than it's sort of the soft side, which is it's the nice thing to do, is actually, it is absolutely the best business oriented decision making matrix that we have, and the proof is in the inefficiencies in the space already happen to coincide with very poor patient engagement start to finish.
Great points.
Yeah, very good point. Well, I want to thank you all very much for engaging in this really incredible and powerful session on empowering patients. Thank you to the audience. The session is recorded, and there are some questions that I'll ping over to our panelists, and maybe we could get a written response from you. But thank you all very much. Please keep in mind that this is part of a trilogy series. So we will have the next 2 sessions on the role of technology, and finally the role that pharma plays in our space. Thank you again, and see you all soon.